Now, we've got to go to former Foreign Minister Alexander Downer. He now joins me live from Adelaide. Good to speak to you, Alexander. You must have been stunned, I would have thought, as a Foreign Minister who's actually been through the very difficult decision a number of times of deploying Australian troops to dangerous settings, whether it be to East Timor, whether it be peacekeeping in the Solomons, and of course to Iraq and Afghanistan, that our Prime Minister is actually contemplating the idea of sending peacekeepers to Ukraine.
Well, his reply just shows his lack of experience, really. I think he's somebody who doesn't do any detailed homework. But first and foremost, the mission that he's being asked about has yet to be even defined. I mean, there isn't a ceasefire in Ukraine. If there is a ceasefire and there's to be some British or European-led peacekeeping force, what will its mission be? What will the parameters of it be? What Anthony Albanese should be focusing on is the capacity of the Australian Defence Force to operate effectively in the Indo-Pacific region. And what we saw last week was the extraordinary failure of the Australian government to monitor effectively a Chinese naval fleet circumnavigating our country. These are the priorities for the Australian Defence Force, not some hypothetical peacekeeping force in Ukraine.
Well, let me just show you a couple of comments from the past few days and test a theory with you. First up, here is the Prime Minister when he first talked about this.
There's discussion at the moment about potential peacekeeping, and from my government's perspective, we're open to consideration of any proposals going forward.
And here's Peter Dutton responding to that on this program last night.
I think the Prime Minister was shooting from the hip. I don't think it was well considered, and I think he was trying to take his moment to look tough and to look strong, but in fact the opposite happened. It was just another example of where Anthony Albanese constantly makes the wrong call.
Yeah, I think Peter Dutton's right there. It's what I'd said the day before too, Alexander Downer, that Albanese is under pressure because he was so weak on China, making excuses for China, that he thought he had to sound tough on Ukraine rather than doing what was obviously and saying what was obviously in the national interest.
So his comments give me the impression he's just making up an answer to a question that he was asked somewhat unexpectedly, that there's been no consideration given by the British who, in theory, would lead this peacekeeping force if it ever were to happen, as to whether to invite Australia. I mean, there's been no discussion about that. So Albanese is just making up an answer for the purposes of the cameras. He should dismiss it as a hypothetical question and say the priority for the Australian Defence Force is the security of the Indo-Pacific region. I mean, if it ever came to it and there was a peacekeeping force, maybe we could send a medical unit or something like that for symbolic reasons. But no, our Defence Force needs extra funding, reinforcement, and to focus on dealing with the threat of China, not worrying about Russia.
Yeah, well said. Thanks for joining us, Alexander.